Hello, everyone. It's Rulon Brown here in Seattle, Washington. And today I am thrilled to be chatting with the great saxophonist, author, educator, Adam Larson. Thank you so much for being here, Adam.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
If you're joining us, you can tune in live on Facebook, and you can also join us on YouTube. We have live question and answer capability here. So if you want to post a comment or a question either place, go ahead and do that. And we'll interact with you that way and get some good questions going for Adam. As we dive in here, I'm also going to give you just a quick background about Adam. If you're not familiar with his artistry, very, very cool, unique artist. Um, I'm going to start off with something that the New York Times said, because I think they actually say something that resonates a lot for me. When speaking about Adam and his music, they said Adam is the sort of jazz musician who gets flagged early as a promising talent and then hustles to meet every requirement for success. And as far as I can tell, that is spot on. I mean, Adam, at a very young age, you were what? You were playing in all the top elite honor ensembles, bands. You went and you studied at Manhattan School. You got your bachelor's in jazz performance, master's in jazz performance, elite honors there. You toured internationally, especially with like the U.S. Embassy Jazz Abroad and some really cool tours there. You've recorded a ton of music. You got 4-star ratings from Downbeat on your recordings, which anybody who's ever put something into Downbeat for review knows that's no easy feat. Uh, and then in the saxophone world, especially, Adam has done something really cool. He's done these kind of like niche within a niche books for study. He did a book called Leaps and Sounds, which really excited just a ton of sax players because it was meant to be really big leaps on the instrument, very non-normal fingering patterns, right, to really stretch you out and get you going. And he's done 3 volumes of that book, all to just huge critical acclaim. Lots of really fantastic saxophonists using that, recommending it, and getting a good deep stretch out of those series, Adam. And that was one of my favorite books that I've had of yours. Conversation Starters is a great jazz vocabulary book that Adam's written. Highly recommend that one. My buddy Nick turned me on to that. And then most recently, Look Mom, One Hand. And it's a book. I'm going to let Adam talk more about it, but this is such a cool idea. And we'll get into that more. But Adam Larson, you are in Kansas City, right? Right now?
Mhm.
Okay. But
Yes.
primarily you're working all over New York. You've spent most of your career in New York and you're still recording all over New York. Tell us a little bit about what's cooking and what's hot for you now. I know you're incredibly busy. What's on the front burner?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's great to get a chance to talk, and I'll echo Rulon's, statement here. If you guys have questions, don't be afraid to ask. I love talking with people who love saxophone and music. So, uh, for me right now, I'm in the middle of a kind of an ambitious project to record 3 different trio albums in the next 12 to 16 months. And the idea behind that is to capture musicians in 3 cities that have played, a part in my development as a musician. So I started with Kansas City because I moved here just to get out of New York. That was the initial move, was just to leave New York City. I didn't have any job or anything lined up out here. I just had a lot of friends in Kansas City that inspired me. So that has remained consistent and the same. So I recorded the first of the 3 trio records last month, and I'm recording the second one with a group of Chicago musicians in another week and a half. And then at some point, once I can get all my numbers together, we'll do the third and final one with the group in New York. So um, it's also a little bit different material. Most of the stuff that I've recorded in my first 5 albums has been almost exclusively original music, and this is going to be something that um, each record is going to have original music standards, which I don't have anything in my discography except for one standard on my second record, which is not as easy to find as the other ones that are out there. And then music that comes from that is composed by important historical figures to each city that the record is being, recorded or paying homage to. So for Kansas City, we did a Bobby Watson composition, we did a Charlie Parker
Oh,
composition,
cool.
and then we did a peer of mine, Peter Schlam, great vibraphonist, to represent, my peer group, of great composers. So um, trying to develop some kind of narrative that people who might dig and people who are not might also have a gateway into the music that way.
Wow, that's a great. I love that you're paying homage to the people who have roots in each place. So Kansas City, Bird, Bobby Watson. Tell me about some of the other folks you're paying homage to with these selections.
Sure. Yeah. So, in Chicago, I'm pretty sure we're still kind of figuring out the material as we speak. But my friend Clark Summers and I, he's the bassist in the project, and then Dana Hall is playing drums. Clark and Dana have been playing together for at least 20 years, if not longer. They're kind of known as a package deal for most every rhythm section you would get in Chicago. And they're amazing musicians. So Clark and I have been going back and forth about what music to program, but Clark is contributing some music to that, so that's awesome. We might play a tune by Johnny Griffin, which is cool. And then there's a fantastic saxophone player who was a mentor of mine and continues to be, um, uh, named John Wojciechowski, a great saxophone player in Chicago.
Oh,
So we're going to cover a tune of his. There's still another. We have some room for maybe one other one, so we're trying to figure it out. But as you can imagine, the more east you go on the map, the more composers and people you have to draw from. I mean, it's not really true, but I mean, uh, definitely with New York, it's going to be harder for me to narrow down, and I haven't yet.
yeah,
What music I'm
yeah.
going to do, So
That's
yeah,
cool. That's
thank you.
cool. Now, are you 3 albums in 12 to 18 months? Did I hear that right as a time
That's
frame?
correct. Hmm.
Man, that takes ambition to a next level, man. From just a logistics standpoint, do you mind if I ask, like, are you self-producing? Is this for multiple different labels? Who's helping you wrangle that many artists, that many studios, that many tunes? Like, I know you're really prodigious. I know
Huh.
you do a lot, and you're always publishing and you're always recording. But, dude, 3 albums that fast? Talk to me. How are you doing that?
Sure. Yeah, it is a lot of logistical stuff to figure out. Right now I have a pretty good fit with a label that I haven't signed anything, so I'll keep them out of it for now. But I have a good feeling about partnering with them for at least 2 to 3 releases. Um, the idea is that part of the problem or just issue that you have when you roll out music is like as soon as you have one thing recorded and put it out, then it's like when's the next thing? So
Yeah,
having something that I can graduate out, I won't release anything until 2022, and I would imagine that I would stagger them, 7 or 8 months apart. So this will keep me having something where I can have recorded music that's coming out that's different, throughout the entirety of 22. And as far as setting up all the logistics, that has always, whether it's recording or booking or anything, it's pretty much um, fallen on my responsibility to do that. Although with the Chicago record, Clark has been a huge help in setting up some of the other stuff around it. But funding is one of the things, as you'd imagine, that is crucial to this. But I'm fortunate to have received a couple of grants, and I'm still waiting to hear some things. But I just think that especially having had to sit kind of on my hands like everybody has in the arts, for the last 18, 20 months, who knows how long it's going to still be. I just felt the need to try to capture some things that were important to me, and, best as I could financially and time wise, put it out there in a way that made sense that I could feel um, fulfilled in a way that I maybe didn't get a chance to for the last 18 months,
that's
So
great.
thank you. Yeah.
Well, and also kudos on the grants. I mean, grant writing in and of itself is an art. And
Yeah.
to nail down some grants to record the music that really inspires you, that's not easy. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, again, I'm fortunate to have secured one. I'm waiting on a couple more to see what happens. It's always highly competitive and as a process, like you just said. So, but I in those grant applications, you have to say like, will you pursue this project with or without funding? And I always say yes. We'll
Yeah.
figure it out. So
Yeah, man. It's like book
yeah,
the gig and you'll play the music. You just figure
that's
it out.
yep, yep, yep. That's true.
Hey, so I want to go to something in your bio that I noticed that I thought was really cool for you to talk about. You said that so you grew up in Normal, Illinois.
Hmm.
right? Um, is that kind of a Chicago suburb? Is it considered kind of close enough to Chicago or not quite?
Yeah, not in the least. If I told somebody that
Oh,
I was from Chicago, I would get made fun of. It's
oh,
about two
okay,
and a half. Yeah, it's about 2.5. Well, depending on how fast you drive, it's between 2.5 hours south of Chicago and about the same distance northeast of St. Louis. So it's
okay.
smack dab in the middle of the state. Yep.
Okay, I just know Normal is the home of NAPBERT, National Association of
Oh yeah,
Professional Band Instrument Repair
sure,
Techs.
sure.
Um, so okay, now I have some context for it. But you were there, and it's kind of a smaller city, and then you know um, you had and have talent, and so you took that talent and drove. Whoa! Oh, fire in my throat. Sorry. Oh man,
Okay, okay.
I'm getting verklempt talking about your talent, man. Mm. So you had really astounding. You stood out as a young artist, and then you went to New York City. And in your bio, you admit you're like it was kind of a big fish in a small pond scenario, where you were really hot talent in Normal, and then you hit New York, and it was like, whoa, everybody's a monster here. Can you talk about that as a young artist, and then also now, more than a decade later, you are looking back as a real meaningful part of the New York scene, a real meaningful part of the saxophone community. You have a presence, you have a voice that's your own. Maybe talk about what it feels to come into a situation where it's like, whoa, I'm not in Kansas or Normal anymore, and
Sure.
and what that feels like to you, man. I think a lot of us would love to learn more about that.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to share it too. Yeah, I often joke that all the things that were normal to me, as a high school student, no pun intended, was, basically not happening for me my freshman year of college. Like I had some friends in high school, I had a girlfriend, I had gigs, like all the staples of feeling comfortable pretty much weren't. And so I remember calling my dad in a panic, like my second month into school, being like, I haven't played a gig in like 8 weeks, because I've been playing with him every single week. I basically could play saxophone. He's a drummer. So,
Oh,
um,
cool.
yeah. And so it was really hard for me to adjust to like not having performance opportunities, on a consistent basis. That was part of it. Also, the level of everybody, obviously, as you can imagine, was just so sky high, both inside the conservatory itself and also, if you didn't feel inspired there, you could walk out of the rooms of the conservatory and take a train downtown and hear somebody that would just be like, "Oh my God, back to the practice room," So, um, perspective is really important, and I've spoken about this a lot pretty candidly, but the intensity of being in an environment like New York at such a young age is not for everybody, and that's totally okay. And I with my students and with young musicians who have their sights set on New York, I try to impart on them the same wisdom that I was told from people that I really look up to, which is like, if you're playing as such that you feel comfortable being in New York, that's one part of it. But psychologically, if you're not ready to be in a place like New York City as an artist, as a freshman in college, you don't be, So I wouldn't have probably done anything different in terms of my trajectory and going to the East Coast. But I can tell you, having been in an environment that was very stressful, for me to try to adjust. It took me my first 2 years of college, to figure out kind of the lay of the land and get to a place mentally where I didn't feel like I was constantly wanting to quit, you know, um,
Wow.
because yeah, because I well, and it sounds dramatic, but I think anybody who would tell you differently, I'd like to meet them and ask them how they went through it, or like maybe maybe they just came into a different situation, but um, I think that it's important to go into something with an open mind. There are things that I did about or things I did in college that I would choose to do differently now, having been young and viewing the world in a different way. That probably would have made my life easier. It's like instead of looking at every tenor player in the school as competition, looking at them as friends, and trying to learn from
Wow.
them.
Can
I
I want to say what you just said. Instead
Sure,
of looking at every tenor player in the school as competition,
yeah,
looking at them as friends.
yeah, and that's a theme that I think there's obviously good competition, healthy competition that makes you wake up in the morning and want to get better. There's also competition that just breeds all the wrong kind of negative things, and with
Yeah.
that negative headspace comes a lot of baggage, and so my first years of college, it's ironic. One of the people that I could not stand, and I think it was pretty mutual, the first years of college is now one of my best friends. Like
Interesting.
it's a maturity thing, and I think that again, being from normal Illinois where I was playing all the time, I felt like I was a part of something. To be dropped off in New York City and feel like it was like, oh my gosh, I'm not even at the bottom of the totem pole of my own school, let alone New York City. It was really deep for me, and so yeah, it's an adjustment. I think college though is an adjustment for anybody, no matter where you go. And
True.
so again, I wouldn't have changed the way I did it because I'm pretty confident that the way I went about it and eventually how I overcame the way I think about certain things is partly the reason why I've enjoyed some of the success that maybe I have in my career. But um I just would reiterate too, like New York is never going anywhere. It's always going to be there, and there are other places that you can still become a great musician if New York is something that terrifies you. And by the opposite side of the coin, if it's something that you want to do, it's there, and it was great for me. I loved being in New York in certain ways, and now being 31 and having a family and all that, I'm glad that I don't live there anymore.
Oh man, I feel you there. Yeah. When you have kids, it's like all of a sudden things change. You're like, oh, I just never even saw the world this way before. And
Yep,
it's just such a lens change so fast.
sure,
And now you're in Kansas City. You're teaching at UMKC, right?
correct.
University of Missouri, Kansas City.
Yep.
And man, there's some stuff happening there. I mean, you're there now. I've Will Peak, really great repair tech. He moved there
Yeah.
recently.
Yep.
Um, I don't know if you take your horns to him or have ever worked with him, but
I've yeah, he's great. I've had him I had my horn with him just a month and a half ago, and he's an alum of UMKC as well. So
oh,
he was there when Bobby Watson was at the helm.
cool.
And yeah, so but like I mentioned, like it was my journey to Kansas City couldn't have been more random in a way. Like my second child was born in 2016 in February, and our lease was going to expire in May in New York. And we, for by all accounts, for New York, we had a good spot. It was 3 bedroom, 2 bath in Riverdale, which is like you'd never know you're in. When people say, when I go back home and I say, I live in the Bronx, people are like, are you safe? And I'm like, come on, man, like I'm safe. It's like, but it was a nice spot. But even with that, and I looked at how much we were spending, and it was like, we had to make a change. And I thought for all intent and purposes that I was going to go pursue my doctoral degree the fall of 2019. But
Hmm.
long story, I waited and waited and waited, and it didn't end up happening. So I was faced with the choice of like re-upping my rent for substantially more money and having just had a second child, or try to do something different. So my wife and I got a piece of printer paper and we drew down a line down the middle, and we wrote two cities that we thought were cool: Chicago and Kansas City. And I called some friends in both spots, and I got on a plane the next week and I met my dad. He like drove down from Illinois because I never bought a house before, so done that. And um, yeah, it was wild. Like I flew in, and by 7:30 that night we had bought a house. It was nuts. So
Whoa.
um and I just we just moved. Like we moved, and after I guess like a month after we bought the house, we were still living in New York. So we were like paying two rents, and it was a lot, but while I was still in New York, some friends that I had in Kansas City who were teaching at UMKC spoke to the then assistant coordinator, and mentioned that I was coming to the area, blah blah blah. One thing led to the next, and that's how I was able to come on faculty as an adjunct saxophone teacher.
Wow. So
So,
you moved without a gig.
oh
You
yeah,
just moved to position your family
yeah,
where you thought you needed to be.
yeah, the most of the stuff that I do, I'm very fortunate that the stuff that is active income that I do is highly centered around getting on a plane and going somewhere and doing a master class or a clinic, that kind of thing. And if it's not that, then um my teaching studio, Proud of UMKC, I would say probably for a decade, I saw um hardly no students in person. So my entire teaching thing for a decade has been online,
Wow.
via FaceTime or Skype. And so that was a big component of me feeling financially stable enough to like say, okay, we're just gonna leave New York and we'll figure it out. So
Good for
um
you.
Thanks. I appreciate that. So but it's nice to be in the middle of the country. I have a busy fall and spring, fortunately. Hopefully everything stays together, but I can drive to most of these places, which is great. I enjoy driving, and so yeah, it's just it worked out really it has worked out really well, and for anybody who's ever rented and then you pay a mortgage for the first time and the mortgage is lower than your rent and you're putting stuff towards equity, you're like, wow, how did I do the opposite for 12 years? Like, it's just insane.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah,
It's a hard nut to crack, but once it cracks, you're like, oh yeah, this is it. I love it.
totally.
Oh wow. Um, that's so fascinating to me. We're gonna have to talk offline about being a dad
Sure.
some more, because
Sure.
you are definitely balancing some stuff there, and I think it's so cool that you were essentially zooming out with your online studio a decade before everybody else was scrambling with COVID and pandemic to figure that. I mean, that's really great that you have that skill set so dialed in. Well, and it probably speaks to why people really enjoy studying with you.
Well, I
Um,
appreciate it. And again, I feel really fortunate that that was kind of already, I mean, it was a big part of how I derived my active income prior to COVID. So, um, I was fortunate to have that already in place. You're right, and I don't take that for granted at all.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure it takes a lot of work to build that up that way, even building up any teaching studio, but let alone getting the skills and whatnot to do it
Sure.
well online. Cool, man. Shifting gears a little bit. Let's talk about your book, your new
Okay.
book,
Sure.
Look Mom, One Hand.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, as a guy who now makes the bulk of his living helping people have better functioning left hand keys on their sax, I love this book, man. I love this. So tell people about what this is and where you got the concept and how you approach this material.
Sure. Yeah. So, it's funny because I posted a couple summers ago. I was in St. Louis working at a summer camp for one of my friends, um, and the rehearsal room for the combo was in the kitchen. It's just strange, and I was just like, I don't know what encouraged me to try this, but I turned on the camera for Instagram and I recorded myself playing a couple of courses over tune up, but just with my while I was like opening the fridge. This was like 2 years ago, and the engagement was predictably like a little bit more than me just posting or whatever, and um I took the pandemic uh uh to make a goal like every 60 days. It wasn't a hard goal, but that's ended up happening was like every 60 days I put out a new book, because I just felt like that was the way to keep myself sane, was to like write a project that I felt really passionate about and hopefully it helps somebody somewhere. And I got to the point where I was like, okay, I'm kind of running out of ideas. What could be maybe like a novelty thing, but also that I don't necessarily see existing. And Bob Reynolds, you can check out, he has a nice YouTube video about playing with one hand. I actually didn't see that before I wrote the book. I had some students after the fact say, hey, is this a Bob Reynolds thing? And I'm like, well, it wasn't, but that's awesome too.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think it's for me, especially, like, I try to write products, or write books that and things, resources that if you're an advanced saxophone player, there's going to be something that you can gain from it. And if you're a beginning saxophone player, there's going to be something you gain from it, which is, whether it's me or somebody else, I think catering to that wide of a spectrum can be a difficult thing to do. But I think if you're an advanced saxophone player, you probably, when you improvise, you probably end up defaulting to certain things, that you might just play without thinking about. So not having the right hand available to you, you have to think about playing the saxophone a little bit differently. And I mean, other than that, I wanted to try to write a book that could be fun, engage the community in a way that's kind of lighthearted, but also like if you play through the material, I hope it actually helps you with your palm keys, or it helps you think about how to get around changes with limited amount of information. You know, so that was kind of the emphasis of the book, and also I thought like, okay, it's ironic too because I would imagine that part of this has to do with the fact that I put out so much volume of stuff so quickly. But that, hey, if I'm a betting man, the internet, this isn't the most successful book I ever write, and so far it exactly panned out that way. Um, but it's okay. I've been very fortunate to have other products do really well, and it's not that it hasn't done well. It's just my wife said the same thing because I was like, man, why isn't this doing better than I thought? And she's like, because you just put out a new book like last week, and I'm like, you're right, So, um,
Yeah.
but I had
And everybody, I think in general, people are just pretty exhausted right now.
sure,
It's been
sure,
an exhausting time,
yep,
but at the same time, sometimes that slow and steady burn where word spreads and as people, don't worry, man. It's
sure.
good content. It's
Well,
good.
I
It's good.
appreciate I appreciate it. Yeah, it's and it's fun for me too. Like when I wrote Leaps and Sound, if I'm being 100% honest, I wrote it because I saw other people my age doing books, and I was like, man, let me do something that's different from that. That was my first thing. I was like, anything you can do, I can do better. So like clearly, I haven't lost that competitive edge about how I think about things. Um, but I had no intention of like making the significant gains that I did monetarily from it. I just wanted to put out a thing that was like, hey, like you said, here's a niche and a niche within a niche. I don't see necessarily
Yeah.
a resource because with the leaps and sounds thing too. Like, I remember as a student, I did like the Lenny House etudes, right, or maybe some of the Greg Fishman stuff. Those are awesome resources. My only argument is like if you're an advanced um, classical saxophone player in high school, you're asked to deal with the altissimo from like your freshman year of high school on, and I never remember playing through anything other than playing those etudes up an octave that was
Yeah.
like meant for the altissimo. So I don't know, for better or for worse, if you're a tenor saxophone player aged 40 or under, altissimo is probably something you're going to have to tackle. So I want to try to write a resource that would be fun and challenging in that way, and help some people. So that's always my aim. It makes sense, but it's important to me to have something that is like going to be helpful, that can, comes from a place of integrity. So the book, One Hand book, is it was a fun project. Plus, I like goofing around and doing some extraneous tasks with the other hand, or trying to I try to tie my shoe in one of the videos, and tying your shoe with one hand is like not possible. So
Yeah, that's hard under any circumstance, let alone playing a solo or
yeah,
something. Yeah, not
yeah, makes
not
no
gonna
sense to
work.
me. Yeah,
Oh, and now you have a deal going on right now, where people can get your entire catalog, digital catalog, right? There's a summer
yeah,
special.
yeah.
I
If you
need to
just
go like get on this.
you
What?
know,
Tell me
it,
about it.
it was funny. I posted every day this week. I've been posting the same thing. I've been like because Instagram is one of those places too. Like I'm sure you probably know, it's like people go to YouTube or something for evergreen content, and for Instagram, it's like what happened 4 seconds ago. So it's like very rare that somebody's gonna like go back to it even a day later. So every day after the 24 after my story disappears for the like this entire week, I've just deleted my grid post and uploaded some other like obnoxiously like, hey, buy the book and like type thing. So today I was just like, hey, I think the math is such that you can get all the stuff I've ever put out for under $100. And it was really funny because I put it up an hour ago and somebody put in an order for every single thing, and it was like $97. So um you can just use code summer sale through the whole month of August. I try to do one big sale. Right now it's you can use that code for the whole month, and it's 70% off anything. So
Cool.
um yeah, it's
Good bargain there.
I'm
Tons
trying
of practice and
trying.
learning to be had. I mean, well worth the investment.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Um, so let's talk about you as a player. Okay, we
Okay.
talked a lot about you as an author and a recording artist, and let's talk about maybe you in your right now you're in your studio, you're in your practice studio, right?
I
We see
am.
you here often where you're shedding, you're working on tunes, you're talking out through your various social media channels. When you're in the shed, what's something that you do absolutely every time you pick up your horn? Do you have any rituals like that? That it's just part of Adam seizing the horn? What is that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Historically, the answer is yes. Like, there are four things that I try to touch every time I practice, but in the last year and a half, it has been wildly inconsistent. In terms of like, what happens when I get to the instrument. So, um, I've, you know, counterintuitive to how I teach, which I don't want to sound like I'm a teacher where like you're not supposed to have fun when you practice, but if you're truly practicing, it's gonna be versus performing. And I always try to like my students sold on like the more you practice and like don't sound good, the better you're gonna perform because you practice. It doesn't work the other way around. So um basically around last April, I was like, things are too depressing not to enjoy when I sit down and play a saxophone. So I'm just gonna go with that. And I went about practicing for the first time in my life in a long time, where I was just like, what brings joy to me? That's also a little bit challenging, which I had never thought that way. I'd always been the opposite. Like, what is the thing I could possibly think about and like just stink at it all day, and then I'll like see a little gain, hopefully, and that's one way of going about practicing. That's like can be kind of miserable, to be honest, but you know, um, so like one thing that I'm really adamant on with all my students is sound production, and that's the first part of my practice pie. There's four macro topics that I go through. I only teach and expect from my students, which is tone, technique, vocabulary, and tunes, and in that order. I tell the story all the time, but my mother is in her 37th year of junior high school band. 37 years, which is just
Okay,
like,
so your mom teaches junior high band. Your dad's a drummer.
yeah, yeah.
Okay,
My
pretty musical family.
Yeah, totally. And my grandfather, my dad's father, was uh, a World War II era DJ on the air for 61 years. So
Wow.
yeah, it runs pretty deep in my family. But when I started playing saxophone at like age 11 or whatever, I was playing hot cross buns or something, and my mom tapped on my door and she's like, "I'm so glad you're practicing, but like keep in mind, if you don't get your sound to sound good, like I'm not even gonna want to listen to you." And I was like, "Wow, that's pretty cold to say to an 11-year-old mom," but
Damn, mom.
you know, I'm
That's
30.
brutal.
Yeah. I'm 31 and I've yet to recover. But she was right. It's like if your sound sounds great, or good, then everything else is gonna sound better. So in my own, practice routine, and this practice routine was given to me by that saxophone player from Chicago I mentioned, John Wojciechowski. When I was 13, I went to Birch Creek Music Camp, which is this camp in the middle of Egg Harbor, Wisconsin, like in the middle of nowhere. Literally, like when I went there, it's much more posh now, but when I went there, the bunking situation was like inside the barn. It was deep. I loved it. It was great. The only thing you could do was like shed and go to Walmart, and I was like, I don't want to go to Walmart. So, it was great. And one of the master classes, I never forgot it. He was like, these are the four things you should be touching on as macro topics, tone, technique, vocabulary, and tunes. And then you should be able to, with the help of a teacher on your own, be able to address microscopically what you need to do with each of those things. So that's why I try to tell my students, and that's why I try to work on it myself. But if your tone sounds good, your technique sounds better. If your technique is together, the vocabulary comes quicker, and if the vocabulary comes quicker, you can implement it to a tune. So um as of late, when I practice saxophone, I'm trying to go through the tune part of what I do, just to stay fresh on some things and try out some harmonic concepts. But I've been historically a big fan of intervals. First, it was kind of a cop out because I had I had um an easier time having success seeing excuse me, gains when I would practice technical stuff because it's very cut and dry. Can you do thirds in four directions? Can you do fifths? Blah blah blah. You know, it's ironic that some of my students I work with that are on the older side of things, some of the things that they say, they listen to me play sometimes. I say, well, what is that? And I say, well, it's the things that we've been talking about for the last 3 semesters, like the nuts and bolts stuff. When I was younger, I had a lot of success with that, but it didn't sound like anything on the recording, which was like the most frustrating part. And I'm sure anybody who's practiced that kind of stuff, you can look at the things, you can play it, forwards and backwards, but there's like that chromatic grease that's really hard, the hardest part to like unlock. So
Mm.
I think the biggest thing that's changed for me in my practice now and how I conceptualize playing is that when I was younger, I would use intervals as a way to approximate the changes. I'd be inside the sound, but there was no chromatic grease to get from point A to point B, which is like all the stuff that I ignored when I got to college. Even I was like, oh, this is math. I'm going to do chord tone this and approach that and blah blah blah. Just it didn't. It I was like, it felt like math to me. When I went to hear Seamus Blake at the 55 bar one night, I was like, oh man, everybody's right. Like that's what it is. Like, oh no. So, um, I practiced some of the stuff. It's a long way of saying, but some of the stuff that I ignored, while I was in school, that's what I try to pinpoint when I practice now, which is like approaching to this and doing that and the stuff that, again, if you're a good practicer and more importantly, observe how you practice and the gains are not that you're making, and you solicit advice from people that you trust, eventually you should know what to practice to get better. And if you don't, then that's a different thing you have to unlock, or work out
Right.
of. But um, I would say right now, I do a lot of where I draw inspiration for what I practice is A, from what I'm deficient in, and B, from teaching people. There's probably not a day that goes by that I don't teach at least one lesson. I so far today, and I have one after this. So it's it's great, but it's like I got to come up with ways to stay fresh when I teach, and that helps me again, kind of have an idea of, and a lot of the Instagram stuff you see me post. if it's not one of these days where I just go into the basement and I change my outfit 14 times, because I do that, like I'll get like 2 weeks of content done and be like, okay, I can just post, when I get up. But if it's a little bit more randomized, it'll be it'll be usually something I just talked about with a student that I'm like, oh, that might be kind of cool, hey Wayne, thanks for joining us. So I know it's a long answer and I went a lot of places, but I hope it hit some things.
Okay, yeah, you did, and I'm trying to keep mental notes of some stuff I want to follow up on, but it's great. Lots
Sure.
of meat there. You said something really fast in passing. Play triads in 4 directions.
Oh yeah, yeah.
What's
So
I understand like triad up, triad down, or
sure,
thirds. I'm sorry, thirds in
yeah, yeah,
in 2 directions. What's the what are the other 2 dimensions I'm missing?
yeah.
Talk to me
Definitely.
about this.
Yeah, yeah. So I go through this thing that my teacher, I only really had one private saxophone teacher when I was in Illinois. His name was Larry Harms, and he is taught I don't know if you know Greg Ward, great saxophone player in Chicago. He teaches at University of Indiana, and Doug Stone teaches at uh, LSU. I mean, some amazing saxophone players all came out of this seemingly random studio in East Peoria, Illinois, with this guy named Larry Harms. Just like amazing saxophone players. Um, and first lesson, he went to this idea of the 4 primary directions. You can move an interval. You know, what he would say is like, okay, let's do thirds all up. So like 1 3 2 4 3 5 4 6, so on and so forth. Like everybody practices them. Then you can move the same third pairs all down as you ascend. So 3 1 4 2 3 5 6 4.
Okay.
So if you can go up and you go down, you can do permutations 1 3 4 2 3 5 6 4, and the opposite. So that's one.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's one up, one
Okay.
down.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All
So,
right.
but you can see if you maximize that out to like doing scales and sevenths or octaves or a bit larger than that, that becomes very tricky and something again like I envy people in a certain way that are at that part in their development where they can like say, okay, I can do thirds and 4 directions because I often say that when you're at the start of your journey as a musician, you have to work like this much to see this much result. And then when you like the more hours you put into it, it's like you got to work all this to see like maybe that. And then
Yeah.
if only that, like you're the only one who recognizes it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's like I did it
Yeah,
here
and the
alone, and it doesn't matter on the stand.
yeah, you're
But
like
it helps.
yeah,
Oh
yeah,
yeah, yeah, man. Oh, that's
yeah,
so true. That's so
yeah,
true. Oh, okay, cool. Thanks for clarifying that.
sure.
Um, and then there was another thing I wanted to follow up on with you about that.
I'm sorry, I speak so insanely fast, and I'm like
No,
so
no,
out
it's
about
it's all
so
good. It's all good. It's just a free flow conversation. Um, I think it had to do with yeah, it'll come back to me, man. No worries, no
sure.
sweat. Um, so let me ask you this. Oh no, yeah, sorry, it just came back to me. So we were talking about intervals and big leaps at one point, and you were talking about classical sax players and how classical players, even at like freshman level, if they're really a serious high school freshman, they're having to do altissimo. They're having to do really big leaps, and they're having to do it with really clean technical ability, relaxed, resonant. None of this like oh,
Yeah, yeah, right, right,
like all
right,
over the donkey jaw.
right, right.
Um, so as someone who has helped a ton of sax players work on their we'll call it flexibility, right? Tone, intonation, all of it has to be flexible across the range of their instrument. What would you say to sax players who don't come from that classical situation, who don't have that grounding that way? Like, what would you tell a jazz guy who maybe comes to you after playing their first few weeks of leaps and sounds? If you're just tuning in, man, it's his series of books. You got to check it out. And he's like, man, I just can't do these things in tune, or I just can't do them comfortably. Like, how do you? I'm sure you've had that question before. I'd love to hear how you respond to that.
Sure. Yeah, it's a fair question, and it's something that um, even with classical saxophone players, and that's something I want to just say make clear. Like I don't play any classical saxophone. I um I've never studied classical saxophone or the sound concept. Some of my closest friends though in like the academic world are classical saxophone players. So I'm constantly trying to like what should I be aware of, but like you'll never ever hear me play like the Glazunov because it'd be the saddest thing you've ever heard in your entire life. So you know, but I think that you're absolutely right. Like there's a really solid foundation of technical study on the classical side of the horn. Otherwise, you just can't do it. So I try to lead the questioning to like, well, let's see where the deficiency might lie in your own technical regimen. Because like I just mentioned a little bit ago, it's like a lot of the students that I see, um, some of the things that they're lacking in are some of the nuts and bolts stuff. So if there's there's excerpts from that book too where it's like the system that I'm using is let's say you play like I could just I could probably just play an example. If the sound goes crazy, you let me know. But
Okay,
it's like
cool. I'm excited.
everybody. I probably need a reed to play. That'd be helpful.
Ladies and gentlemen, Adam Larson is now going to play without a reed or a ligature.
Yeah, right. No, it's my new book. Look, no hands, no mouthpiece.
Look, no reed.
Yeah. So, you know, um, I try to show them a corollary between like where they might be at, where the book is at, and how to get from point A to point B. So, and how it also happens in the writing. So Donnie McCaslam was one of my teachers at MSM, and
Cool.
pound for pound, I think he's like one of the best virtuosos, of the
Yes.
instrument. So,
Yes.
um, his whole thing that I like so much is the large interval stuff. So, um, trying to sell a student on the importance of diatonic intervals and being able to do the different directions, that's important too. But showing them like, okay, it's not randomized in leaps and sounds. There's a lot of system to it. So, um, like for instance, this is a sound that everybody has played. I'm sure, which is a B flat major scale, right? And so it's like those notes that we know them in that order is like 8 7 6 5 4 3 2 1. Which if you're like, even played saxophone for a year, you're like, okay, I know that scale. I never have to practice it again. Wrong. Like when something becomes like easy, you should make it difficult again. So those notes, as I just said, are 8 7 6 5 4 3 2 1. So a way to make that way more difficult is to just rearrange how you play them. So like if I put 8 in the bottom, which is my lowest available C, and I put 7, a semitone below it, I would get low B, and then I don't have no range to play the rest of the scale. So instead, I'm going to put that low B, so that's the 7th note. I'm going to put it up a 7th. So the first two notes of the scale become like this. Okay, and then repeat this pattern until I run out of range. So the next note down on a C major scale for me is natural. So C, B. I can't sing that. I'm not a singer. Okay, so those are the first three notes, and then I go to the next one, G. Okay, now for the sake of everybody on the live and everything, I'll just not play an altissimo F because it's not the point necessarily. So I'm going to play my lowest available next tone, which is F, and repeat the pattern. So a scale that you've played probably like this for your entire life becomes like this, which is significantly more challenging than the previous version, but they're coming from the same place. So and you're right, it takes a certain amount of flexibility to do that, and have things be relatively in tune. It's jazz saxophone, so I hate when people say close enough for jazz, but let's be realistic. Like when you're playing jazz, there's a little bit more flexibility with where the pitch can be than if you're playing the crescent or something.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
um and my thing too, this might be an interesting topic for a little bit, is like I play double lip, which is
Ooh,
yeah,
yeah, man. Let's
yeah.
talk about that.
So
Whoa.
yeah,
Whoa. Okay, okay, okay. Hang on, hang on. I got to tell you my story here about
sure.
double lip.
Okay.
So you said your mom was like, it's good you're practicing, son, but you really need to sound not sucky with your tone.
Right.
um,
Right.
so my mom was a piano teacher. She taught
Okay.
piano on the side, and she was like, her mom was super strict, and so she had this like real intense, like we were going to play a musical instrument, and I didn't want to play in band. I wanted to play soccer. And
Right.
so she took my brother's old alto saxophone, an Armstrong 3000. She put it together with the mouthpiece upside down. She didn't know better.
Right.
And she took me to the basement and she's like, "You're playing saxophone in band. Don't come out. I want to hear notes." and she slammed the door. And that was like the last time she ever made me play, because I, of course, fell in love with it. And I was just like, oh, this is it, man. This is cool sounding. But
Right.
because the reed was on top and I'd never known anything, I started playing double lip because I was just like, well, I'm just going to do this and it sounds good. And it totally worked for me. And it was like a year and a half later that I even knew that you're supposed to put your teeth on the top. And I was at a
Wow.
band camp, and this teacher, he's like, "Are you rolling your top lip?" I'm like, "Yeah, what are you doing?"
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then all of a sudden it was like it buzzed the crap out of my teeth and just hurt so bad, and I wasn't used to it, but I could get this way bigger sound. As well, I could get a really more traditional lead alto style sound, which
Sure.
was, I was at the camp to learn how to do that, right? But I still every now and then come back to double lip as a practice to see if I can stay really resonant and really relaxed with my single lip. And I think
Mhm.
it's incredibly useful. And so that's my like journey into saxophone
That's
embouchure,
wild.
and why I still value double lip as an exercise for me. And
Sure.
I end up having a pretty loose, very loose, um I guess we'd say a very relaxed bottom lip that's very loose and resonant on the reed. And to me,
Sure.
that's really important. And I get a very round shape to do that. And I try to keep this soft and resonant. So anyway, I just babbled on about my love for
No,
double lip and where it comes to for me. You're using it all the time. Talk to me about it, Adam. This is super fascinating to me.
sure. Well, that's crazy that you learned to play with the mouthpiece flipped around. First of all, that's wild. Um,
It was wild. Like, and think about airflow dynamic, right?
yeah,
Like
it's
everything was coming off the top of the roof of my mouth,
yeah,
you know?
it's wild.
And I think it actually helped me because I was instinctively like keeping a high tongue, and
Mhm.
that helped get the air up off the top of my mouth. It was like
That's
this weird
wild.
thing where I was practicing throat shapes and not even knowing it.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
then but I did get turned around, like they turned it on me like what, like a month and a half after I'd been
Wow.
playing. But
Wow.
okay, sorry, go on.
No, that's fascinating to me. I started with teeth on top. I played teeth on top for the first uh 9 years of my saxophone life. I just made a conscious decision the sophomore year of college to switch, um, because bottom parts of these two front teeth are false. I've knocked them out or chipped them more times than I care to admit, and so I went into college, uh, playing
Your
what my
top or your
personality.
bottom? Your
My
top or your
top,
bottom teeth?
my
Okay,
top.
yeah, I'm having some
Yeah,
chipping on my teeth as well. Okay, so you're
got it.
having chippy, sharp teeth on top?
Yeah, yeah, and I was playing a metal mouthpiece at the time. I was playing like Crescent, and I like most kids when they get mad in high school will go out and do something stupid. I would just turn on shorter Abersalds and just rage. Like it's just like the dorkiest thing ever. But like I would buy like squeal, and it would just be like the worst thing ever. And it just me with me playing that mouthpiece, and I studied with George Garzone for the first year of college, and I think screwing with me because he was like, or maybe that was just his thing, but he was like, here, like play a 10 star and a 5 read. And I'm like, okay, like I'll just do it because you're my teacher. And I was like, called him after the like second week, and I'm like, I'm gonna give myself a hernia. I'm gonna go back to an 8, and I'll play an 8 and a 4. Like, can we compromise? But um, it got to be too painful to me to have my teeth on top. So one day I just rolled it over, and I was like, let's just try it. And that guy that I didn't really get along with a whole lot in college, who's now one of my best friends, he actually turned me on to how to make the switch because he was playing double lipped in college. So it was wild because for about a period of 4 months, I would find myself playing lessons and playing in sessions where I would be switching teeth on top to double lip in the middle of a phrase, and it was like it was chaos. So, but I would say basically from 21 on to the last decade, I've played exclusively double lip. I've been times where I've tried to go back and play teeth on top, but they aren't even. So like one part of my tooth hits and the other isn't, and that drives me nuts. Um,
Yeah.
sound palette wise, it's very clear to me that if I play teeth on top, I have much more of a narrow, like direct thing happening, which I really like for the upper parts of my instrument, but it's harder to control for me in the bottom because for whatever reason, playing double lip, I feel like there's a lot more movement left to right, so that the sound is a little bit bigger, a little bit warm. You have to rein it in a little bit more than you would if you play teeth on top. I have metal mouthpieces here in my drawer that I'll play double lip on metal too, which is a weird sensation. It's just I don't know. That's just that's what I've done for the past 10 years. It's just it's what's comfortable. So
Wow.
yeah.
And so what's your setup now as far as reed mouthpiece combo with double lift?
Sure. Yep. I've been with Van Doren, I think, for the past 3 or 4 years. And I play the T7 L, so the large chamber T7. And I play 2.5 V16s. It was
Okay.
with the MO ligature. It was there's a picture I can send you. It's gonna be 4 months to migrate from what I was playing on prior to when I joined Van Doren. I was with D'Addario for 8 years prior to that, and their thing was a little bit looser in terms of the stuff you're allowed to use. Van Doren, the expectation is, especially if you're going to be the artist, one of the artists that they really support, is that you play, reed ligature mouthpiece. So for me to switch from a different reed ligature mouthpiece, it took a long time for me to dial it in. I was playing a custom, LaBelle and a Mark Jean ligature and like the Dario reed. So like to change all of that was pretty interesting. But I remember getting the Van Doren has a lot more options in terms of their reed cuts and profiles and all that. So I started out playing Van Doren. I played a T55 metal V16 metal mouthpiece. I should have never stopped playing. It was the best I ever sounded in high school was on that piece. I saw a friend of mine who was into Michael Brecker get a Gardella Crescent piece, and I was like, I gotta do that. And I should have never done it because my sound was so much better on the on the V16. But so going back to V16, and the Van Doren after like 16, no, something 13 years, it was cool, and I've loved being with them. But I play softer setup, to answer your
I
question.
I want to call out the softness of the reed, but
Yeah.
also let's talk. Is there I don't know that piece
Oh, it's
personally.
great.
Is
Yeah.
it baffled? Is it rollover? Is it I mean large chamber? That's
Yeah, here's where I show my, like, I can't believe he doesn't know that kind of stuff. All I know is like it works or it doesn't. So the baffle, the rollover, that stuff, I have no clue. All I know is that it's the 7 that they do, like, so just the T7 but with a large chamber. I know it doesn't help hardly at all,
okay.
but
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, so
But
in let me get this straight. Oh, you're holding it up. Wait, yeah, yeah, hold it up, man.
yeah, yeah,
Let's do it.
yeah. This is
If
it.
you rotate
So
in, rotate slowly.
okay,
Oh, that looks like slight rollover, if anything. Yeah, that's
yeah.
pretty open. Okay, so it's not like crazy rock baffle, but it's got like a horseshoe in it, or is it all round chamber?
It looks
Yeah, it's got a little bit of a sidewall that's kind of straightish. Cool, man. Okay, so um, that's interesting. Okay, one of your Van Doren colleagues, Roxy Koss,
Oh yeah, sure.
she was having some real bad pain and discomfort, and she had to redo her entire embouchure approach, and she ended up going to a smaller tip opening, softer reed, and for her it meant way more resonance. And you talked about how George Garzone, and you're the second person I've interviewed who said George Garzone like slaps a 10 and a 5 on
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
It's like, here you go,
yeah.
Sonny.
Exactly, exactly.
um, so in college, you're like doing, heavy bench press mouthpiece stuff with George
Yes.
Garzone. And then you step down to an 8 and a 4, an 8 and a
Yeah.
4.
Yeah, and the Dario Kane is much softer than a 4 in Van Doren. A 4 in Dario is going
True.
to be like maybe a 3. So
Okay.
yeah,
But still, that's
it's
pretty
yeah,
hefty. And then now you're chilling out even more. I had a path kind of like that. Like I was at 3.5 and I was on a 6, and I had a teacher's like, why? Like, can you
yeah,
tell me why? Can you justify it? Like,
yeah,
play one note for a month and get back to me.
right,
And then I was like, oh crap, why am I working this hard? And I went down to
right,
3, and I've been at a 3 ever since. And I'm thinking about my embouchure differently, and I'll probably be at a 2.5 the older I get.
yeah,
but
man.
but like, do you think that that's a thing? Is that like an embouchure maturity thing that we do, where we realize how little we have to actually work and lift to
I
get
mean,
that sound? Like what?
I I don't know how to describe it, because I also have, like, Roxy's husband is a fan saxophone player, and he plays the opposite from what I remember. I mean, it's hard to keep up. He switches things so often, but everything he plays sounds amazing. But when I knew him in New York, one of the pieces he played was like a T9, which is like a huge mouthpiece by comparison with, like, basically tongue depressors, so it's like
Yeah.
you know and he sounds great. So, like, I mean, I don't know. For me, it is gonna sound hilarious, but when I moved to Keys, when I dropped down to 2.5s, and because I was like, man, I need like the dad read. Like I just put it on and it plays, and like I don't have to spend half my practice session like trying to figure out like, oh, I wish I could play a 3. No, I just play the 2.5 and like work some things around. And like I tried to make twos, like a 2 and a 6. I was dead set on like, oh my god, this would be amazing if I could just make a 2 and a 6 work. But inevitably, every time I went upstairs, it was like I was having problems that I never would have. And I'm like, oh man, if there's just a way to make this 2 and this 6 work, it'd be fantastic. And then I put the
When you
2
went upstairs, what do you mean? What do you mean
like
by that?
altissimo wise. Oh, like
Oh, okay. I thought because you said going down to my basement to practice. So I was like, when I go up and I talk to my wife, they're like, "No, man, no
yeah,
twos."
yeah. She was like, "Boo, you suck." No, no, it was
That is
so
harsh in the
yeah,
Larson family,
yeah,
man.
man, yeah. No, it's
Oh,
definitely yeah, like altissimo, but yeah.
cool.
So
Yeah, that's what I find as well. Like I can't. I actually was trying to goof around on some synthetics. I was somebody sent me a bunch of synthetics to try, and I
sure,
was handing them to my daughter. She's just turned 12, and she's I like here like you got a new young embouchure. You don't know what you don't know yet. Try
right,
this, and
right,
and and we were kind of just going back like having this reed tasting session, and I couldn't make it when the reed's too soft. I can't control it reliably in altissimo. It
right.
is that sweet spot where I need some resistance and that kind of difference. But yeah, that's fascinating. Thanks for kind of taking us into that journey.
Sure,
Um, and I want to go back and watch more videos of you playing now, knowing that you're double lip. Like I didn't
sure.
catch that, and when I've seen you play, like I never would have caught that. Um, do you have any pain when you play?
Zero,
Okay,
zero. I have a lot of pain when I put teeth on top, like a lot of pain, and that's why I never made the switch back. So
yeah,
yeah,
cool, cool, man. Yeah, I had pain when I first did it, and then I got a bite plate, and I was okay.
got it.
But now I like during the pandemic, I got a chipped tooth, and I'm just too lazy, and like I don't, I just like I haven't had it fixed, and I'm like, oh man, I'm messing up my mouthpieces, and it's zingy more, and um. Anyway, okay, enough about the embouchure stuff. We could go on. We could sax geek out on that forever.
Sure,
Um, so let's talk more about like let's talk about art and musician stuff, like the
sure,
stuff that is in our hearts and in our minds, playing constantly, and we try to get it out through the instrument somehow.
sure.
Um, so when you're definitely one for shedding. Like you shed hard, you shed purposefully, and you write purposefully. What about those times where you're like standing in front of a microphone in the studio or you're on stage and for whatever reason you're just not feeling it, you're just exhausted, you're just trying to be there but you don't feel like you're actually there? What do you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that trying to see the reason why you do it, that goes beyond your solo in that moment or the way you use the music. You know, there are also things I would just say like that you can do to prevent from yourself from being in that situation if you can control it. You know, that's a different thing I think than what you're asking. But having said that, I found myself in those exact situations by no fault of my own, which is to say, taking a gig that like I should have just said no, I don't want to do that, and taking it anyway. Like I've been the person I don't want to be, and I've seen the person that I don't want to hire, which is like to say that you take a gig and, um, your attitude is such that, whether your body says it or you're playing or whatever, it's like, well, are you having fun? That's nobody wants to deal with that, So, um, I try really hard never to step up to the plate, but and be that way. But sometimes things happen between saying yes to a gig you want to do and you get to the gig and like your head is somewhere else, So I think trying to remember that it's, again, it sounds corny, but it is, like how many people get a chance to actually wake up and do what they want to do, for the majority of their life, work wise. And so even if it's a gig that I don't feel good about or I don't want to play or whatever, it's like I have a chance to do this is the way that I earn money or that I impact people, and again, it's a little bit frou frou, but at the same time it's
No,
like
no, no, I love
I
it.
I think it's important to never lose sight of that, because it's like when there are three people in the audience, it's very difficult to like dig deep inside and be like, oh, let me play for these three people. It's a lot easier to be like, get mad, and like that's totally cool too. I've been there as recently as 2 weeks ago, so but it's like, you know in that moment you think about a lot of the things, like, sometimes it's just easy to get lost in that moment and all the stuff that you have to do to get to that moment, and what a blessing it is to just play original music for people and get paid to do that, you know. So
Yeah.
um again, yeah, even recording my first record was more difficult than I would have liked it would have been. Once you get in a certain headspace, it can be very difficult to recover from that, and that can have kind of like just compounding effects on how the rest of the day goes, and so I think over time, learning how to mature through that, have an idea of how to deal with the situations has really helped. And again, not losing perspective,
Yeah.
but it can, everybody's human. You can show up on a gig and just could be completely base. But yeah,
No, that's great though.
yeah, yeah. So anyway,
And then here's one I always love to ask. I
sure,
think it's actually really hard to keep things simple. Simple is harder
sure,
than complex. We can do complex
sure.
all day. We can overcomplicate things. But to keep things simple is hard, and it takes a lot of intention. So, looking back on your creative journey, and I don't mean that in the terms of your musical life. I mean your creative journey, your life with a bigger L, right?
Sure.
Um, what do you wish you did less of?
Worrying about things I can't control, unequivocally. That's number one. That is the biggest deterrent of my productivity. It gets really deep when you have a family and when you have a wife and kids, because uh, when it's just your own nonsense in your head when you're single, that's a lot easier to compartmentalize. But when you have all that nonsense running in the background of you trying to be a good dad and a good father, it's not worth it, and that's something that has been one of the hardest things for me psychologically to wrap my mind around. Is like I can have a bad day on the saxophone or whatever, but I can't let that make me a worse human being to the people who are accountable to. And that's the thing that I continue to struggle with the most, if I'm being 100% honest, is just like, it's very easy to open up a web browser and have your entire day destroyed in 30 seconds if you want to let your mind go there. I think anybody who says that they're immune to that is just like flat out full of it, because we live in a generation where it's like, even somebody, and that's why it's just, I don't know, it's uh it's never been, in some ways, I think, more difficult to be a productive and keep a clear things than it is right now, because even with the best intentions, if you open up the wrong thing and you allow yourself to, you can be spending time that otherwise could be spent in like literally hundreds of other ways that are, so the one thing that I would encourage everybody to do, to take me as examples, like I spent most of my 20s when I was obsessing about my own thing, obsessing about somebody else's thing and saying, well, why don't I have that? Why am I not doing this or X, Y, and Z? And so gone into my 30s, I've gotten a little bit better at it, but there are still many times where I'm like, man, I chose to do that with my day, and that affected this with my day. And so um, it's important, I think that, going along with that, just to wrap up, I think is finding that good life work balance is so important. And it's hard with art because a lot of people, the way they view art is a way for them to escape, and the way that we view art is, this is what we do, so having something to escape what you do that other people are supposed to enjoy, that's a hard thing to work, through. So my escapes that I like outside of music that I wish I would have done more of when I was in New York, certainly, sports, going and taking in other disciplines of art if it has to be art, but having some, and I that's something that I'm trying to get better at. I mean, my kids and my wife are not a hobby; they're my life. But it certainly helps to have, them in my life in ways that I can't even describe. Because prior to having even just a steady girlfriend and my wife, it's just like all I did all the time was music, and that's not healthy. So
Amen.
trying to have things that inspire you and keep you happy and that kind of thing outside of music, that's something I would do differently,
Yeah.
and spend a lot less time comparing myself to others, because uh it's just pointless,
Yes.
so
Yes. Great
anyway,
advice. And I
so
want to I want to circle back to something you said there. Am I hearing you right that when you click on that browser and it ruins your day and you say like, man, I spent my time doing this, is it comparing yourself to others, or is it just the current events and being caught up in, oh man, I gotta oh I could do, is it that, is it a comparison and like a FOMO? Can you
it's
talk about that?
yeah, sure, it's a mixture of both, it's a mixture of both. And the I think the supremely messed up about it is that, like, um I sit by all accounts in a position where like I'm able, doing exactly what I want to do. So for me to whine about it or even say that can seem, I feel bad about saying that sometimes, but at the same time, you know, everybody's human, and the way you see the world is through your own lens. And so the way somebody sees my thing, they could tell like, hey, here's objectively, not subjectively, like just look at this, like this is what you have going on. I could be like, yeah, but I'm not doing that, and they're like, well, who cares? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
right.
and I'm like, well, I care. And it's like, it's just this like vicious cycle of nonsense. And my wife has put up with it more than she would ever want to admit, but it's like, yeah, comparing yourself to somebody or like, oh, I'm not doing this, I'm not on this festival, I'm not doing that, blah, blah, blah. It's just, I get it. I understand it. I've lived through it for a long time of my artistic career and life, but the more I can address those feelings and say, okay, this is what it is. Let me recognize it for what it is and move on. That's the healthier thing. But I
Yes.
never did that. I never did that in my 20s. It was always the opposite. It was always like, so
Yeah.
yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, wow, you've shared some real gems here, and especially for young artists who are really serious about pursuing music as a career, as a livelihood. There's a lot of really fantastic advice in here, stuff
Thanks.
I wish I knew in my 20s for sure.
Oh man.
Well, thank you so much, Adam. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate your candor. I appreciate your, yeah, I mean, you're definitely kind of an open soul, just kind of
I try to
sharing.
be.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. It's really a pleasure to chat with you, and
Likewise.
um, I want to make another plug, y'all. Get to Adam Larson's website. Use the summer. What is it? What's the code?
Summer sale.
Summer sale. Get a bunch of books because they're all great. Seriously, Leaps and Sounds, fantastic. The Look Mom One Hand is awesome. And then another one of my faves is Conversation Starters. But there's just tons of great material there to keep you practicing. And then also, of course, his recordings, which is wonderful. Some really great playing, composing, and just awesome bands happening there on your recording. So, Adam, thank you for being here. I hope that we get a chance to talk again soon, and
I'd love
maybe
to.
have you back to do some. It was fun to hear you talking about that and hear you doing. We'll have to have you with horn in hand a little more next
Yeah,
time. So
I love to. Thank you so
yeah,
much for having me. I appreciate it.
my pleasure, and thanks for being here. You take care, and we'll
Okay.
talk to you again soon.
Thank you. See you, Rulon.
All right, bye bye.